imagine waking up tomorrow and you realize the government that issued your passport no longer controls the main road right outside your town.
Right. Instead, a shadow government does.
Exactly. I mean, they operate their own courts, they collect their own taxes, and, they have just placed a €2 million bounty on the head of your actual president.
It is a jarring scenario, but it really isn't hypothetical. That is the exact reality materializing across the Sahel right now.
Yeah. We're watching this really profound geopolitical transformation where, well, the lines on the map remain the same, but the authority enforcing them is being entirely overwritten from the ground up.
Absolutely.
Good morning and welcome to today's Deep Dive. Our topic is the West Africa Intel Update, focusing on how terror networks are expanding across the Sahel. Today is June 23rd, 2026.
And we are looking at a massive stack of current intelligence estimates spanning mid-June.
Right. And our mission today is to unpack the patterns, the impacts, and the strategic responses to this compounding crisis. But before we jump in, I want to highlight that today's Deep Dive is brought to you by ProWave AI.
Yes, and it is generated using Stylo News.
Exactly. For those who don't know, Stylo News is the consumer application of the Stylo Intel Ops software. That's a platform normally locked down entirely for enterprise operations. I mean, government, military, global logistics.
Which means you, as the listener, have unique on-demand access to the exact same analytical tools used by global decision makers to parse these events.
Pretty incredible.
It is absolutely vital for the scope of what we are covering today. We are tracking a rapid, highly aggressive expansion of terror networks across West Africa, and as we look at these events, we will maintain a calm, professional focus purely on the data.
Right, no fear-mongering.
Exactly. We are evaluating the patterns of events, the varying perspectives of key decision makers, and the most likely courses of action. We're strictly analyzing the geopolitical mechanics without taking any political sides.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have an insurgency expanding rapidly. But to really understand the threat, we need to map the players.
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with an alphabet soup of organizations, JNIM, ISSP, ISWAP.
Right.
How do we actually differentiate what they are doing on the ground?
Well, the clearest way to differentiate them is by observing their methodology of control. Let us start in Mali with JNIM.
Okay.
This is an al-Qaeda-aligned umbrella organization, and over the past few years, they have evolved far beyond a traditional militant strike force. They are actively establishing systemic shadow governance.
So break down the mechanics of that, because shadow governance can sound like sort of an abstract buzzword.
Right.
What does it actually look like for a civilian living in Mali?
It looks like the total replacement of civil services. I mean, if you are a farmer in a rural Malian village, the state police and state judges are completely absent.
What?
Instead, JNIM operates mobile Sharia courts to settle your land disputes or theft claims.
And people actually use them.
Often, locals do utilize these courts because, while brutal, they deliver immediate verdicts without the bureaucratic delays of the actual state. Furthermore, the state tax collector is gone. JNIM steps in and demands zakat, or religious taxes, often taking a direct percentage of a village's agricultural harvest.
And, well, if a village decides they just don't want to pay that tax.
JNIM responds with methodical economic strangulation. They do not just attack the village, they institute total blockades.
Right.
They sever the access roads, prevent commercial trucks from delivering food, and essentially starve the local economy until the village leadership submits. This is the group that has reportedly placed that massive €2 million bounty on Mali's president, Assimi Goïta.
Which is just staggering. They are aggressively projecting themselves as the true sovereign authority.
Yes.
But they're not the only network attempting this, are they? Because the intel mentions the Islamic State Sahel Province, or ISSP, operating in the exact same region.
Correct. ISSP is fiercely contesting the eastern and northeastern zones of Mali, particularly along the vital cross-border corridors leading into Niger.
So they are a direct, violent competitor to JNIM.
They are. And as you shift your focus eastward toward Nigeria, specifically the northeast and the Lake Chad Basin, the landscape is dominated by Boko Haram and ISWAP, which is the Islamic State West Africa Province.
Right. And meanwhile, Nigeria's northwest, places like Zamfara and Kaduna, are plagued by, well, a hybrid ecosystem, right? Where jihadist networks, heavily armed bandits, and kidnapping syndicates just frequently overlap in their logistics.
Precisely. It is a highly volatile mix.
The intelligence in our stack highlights a major shift in their geographic trajectory, though. both JNIM and IS Sahel, are actively entering a new expansion phase. They're pushing southward and converging on the Benin-Niger-Nigeria tri-border area.
Yes, that convergence is a critical data point.
You know, it reminds me of an invasive species choking out a weakened host. You have a state apparatus that is already struggling to project its authority into its rural extremities. Then, these networks take root.
Exactly.
They don't just extract resources, they fundamentally rewrite the ecosystem to serve their own survival, cutting off the host's circulation until the state simply withers away in those regions.
That invasive species analogy captures the underlying mechanism perfectly. They exploit the state's weak presence and embed themselves into the local fabric. What is fascinating here is the strategy of operational convergence.
How so?
Well, independent analyst reporting warns that ISSP is actively attempting to establish physical and logistical links with ISWAP.
Oh, wow.
If they succeed, they could create a unified, region-wide ISIS front, essentially connecting smuggling routes and safe havens across thousands of miles.
Which makes what happened recently in Niamey so deeply alarming, because these groups are no longer just choking out the rural extremities. They are now demonstrating the capability to strike directly at the central nervous system of these nations.
Right. The event you are referencing is the June 18th attack on the Diori Hamani International Airport in Niamey, which is the capital of Niger. The attackers engaged in sustained gunfire and triggered explosions inside the perimeter, resulting in an hour-long firefight.
I read through the specific casualty reports on that, noting the tragic loss of 11 soldiers and 2 civilians, along with the arrest of 20 suspects. And there were 22 attackers in total.
Yes, the scale was significant, and this was actually the second major assault on the airport this year.
Right, and what stands out to me isn't just the tactical outcome, it is the location itself.
Right.
I mean, to launch an assault on an international airport in a capital city, you have to bypass multiple rings of state security.
Exactly.
That requires a level of intelligence gathering, weapons staging, and operational capability that goes far beyond just setting up a rural blockade.
And that is the critical geopolitical takeaway. Now, while Russian-aligned narratives suggested an ISIS affiliate was responsible, other intelligence sources, like Radio France International, pointed to al-Qaeda-linked militants like JNIM.
So there's some conflicting narrative there.
There is, but the broader strategic implication is identical, regardless of the banner they carried. The threat has successfully moved from the ungoverned periphery into strategic rear areas.
Right.
When an insurgency can force a state to defend its capital's airport, the state must pull military resources back from the rural zones, which in turn leaves those areas even more exposed to the shadow governance we discussed earlier.
Yeah, and the economic fallout from striking that central nervous system is immediate. I mean, on the exact same day as the Niamey airport attack, Air France announced the complete and final closure of its Mali representation effective June 30th, 2026.
Yes, that is a major development.
Now, they had previously suspended flights back in 2023, but actually closing the representation is a total severing of commercial and diplomatic ties.
We must analyze that withdrawal as the severing of critical commercial arteries. An international airport serves as a landlocked country's primary economic bridge to the global market.
So what does this all mean for the average citizen? Walk me through the cascading effects of that. A flight gets canceled, a corporate office closes. What does that actually do to the local economy on the ground?
The domino effect is severe. Without direct international air freight, the cost of imports and exports skyrockets because logistics become incredibly expensive and difficult to ensure.
Right.
Foreign direct investment plummets because corporate risk assessment algorithms flag the country as simply inaccessible. For the local population, this translates to businesses shuttering, widespread job losses, and basic imported goods becoming totally unaffordable.
Wow.
It rapidly accelerates the exact conditions of economic despair that insurgency networks rely upon for recruitment.
It's a brutal feedback loop. And looking at the intelligence stack, global powers are recognizing this loop and reacting in vastly different ways. U.S. AFRICOM, the United States Africa Command, has explicitly warned that these networks could establish a recognized quasi-state entity.
That is a very stark warning from AFRICOM. Concurrently, France's geopolitical posture in West Africa is undergoing a massive realignment.
Right. President Macron's administration is experiencing a rapid loss of influence in the Francophone Sahel.
Yes, as the military juntas in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso actively distance themselves from Paris. In response, France is attempting to pivot. They are trying to deepen their economic and strategic ties with Nigeria, essentially utilizing Abuja as a regional anchor and counterweight to their losses in the Sahel.
And that pivot really brings us to the core of the political crisis. Because with traditional international partners either pulling out or shifting their focus, the governments in West Africa are being forced to adopt drastically different survival strategies.
Precisely.
Let's look at Nigeria's approach first. President Bola Tinubu is projecting an incredibly aggressive, outward-facing stance. He recently reported massive operational successes, claiming that 13,000 terrorists were neutralized over the past year.
He also cited an 81% decline in terror-related deaths since 2015.
Right. He is attempting to project absolute state strength through military integration. Nigeria is running these massive joint operations and simultaneously putting 400 terrorism suspects on trial in Abuja.
Which is a massive stress test for their judicial system.
Absolutely. And they are also actively recovering vast arms caches from separatist groups like the Eastern Security Network, or ESN, down in the southeast.
However, we must view those statistics objectively.
Yeah, I have to challenge those numbers based on the analyst reports in our stack.
Yeah.
I mean, an 81% drop in terror-related deaths sounds like a definitive structural victory. But the intelligence flags these numbers as highly disputed by independent monitors.
They are heavily scrutinized, yes. Furthermore, Nigeria is actively accepting U.S. military support, including troop deployments and intelligence sharing, to maintain this operational momentum.
So it feels like they are relying heavily on overwhelming foreign-backed military force.
It is a deeply integrationist approach. They are leaning into Western partnerships to bolster their tactical capacity. Now contrast that strategy with the Sahel juntas.
Right, the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES.
Exactly. The military governments in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have formed this alliance. And their approach to state survival is almost entirely isolationist and increasingly authoritarian.
The internal actions highlighted in the intel are severe. I mean, Mali is actively arresting journalists who question the military's official narrative.
And in Niger, the government just took the extreme step of revoking the nationality of a prominent opposition figure, Mariama Jubrin.
Which is just wild to me. What is the legal mechanism or strategy behind making a citizen stateless just to silence dissent?
It is a mechanism of absolute deterrence. By revoking citizenship, the state removes all legal protections from the individual, effectively erasing their ability to participate in civil society, hold property, or travel.
Wow.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the AES is systematically dismantling domestic opposition while attempting to enforce total information sovereignty. They are currently launching a confederal radio station explicitly designed to counter what they view as foreign disinformation.
Right, and they are severing traditional ties with Western intelligence.
Yes, and pivoting toward alternative security partners, primarily Russia and Turkey, who notably do not attach human rights conditions to their military support.
So you have two completely divergent models of state survival operating side by side. Nigeria embraces the West and tries to overwhelm the insurgency with joint military and judicial operations.
Yeah.
And the Sahel juntas expel the West, lock down the domestic press, revoke the citizenship of dissidents, and attempt to enforce a centralized authoritarian narrative with Russian backing.
Both paths carry immense objective risks. Nigeria faces profound domestic friction relying on foreign forces, generates intense debate over national sovereignty, and massive military sweeps inevitably result in civilian casualties.
Yeah.
The AES juntas, however, risk total diplomatic and economic isolation. By suppressing civil society and expelling traditional economic partners, they are betting their entire national survival on internal crackdowns and alternative mercenary forces.
Meanwhile, the broader regional bloc, ECOWAS, is caught right in the middle, attempting to push for a regional counterterrorism force with initial troops from 6 member states, essentially trying to mediate a rapidly fracturing continent.
It is a highly precarious balance.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because, those are the official government strategies, the press releases, and high-level troop movements. But the reality on the ground tells a completely different story.
Yes, the human element.
Right. We ran these recent events through the Stylo News AI sentiment analysis, scanning platforms like X, formerly Twitter, to gauge how the citizens actually living through this are reacting.
Sentiment analysis provides a vital, unvarnished reality check against official state narratives. It shows us the gap between what a government claims is happening and what the population actually experiences.
And the public sentiment is overwhelmingly negative. It's raw, and it is furious. There is profound anger over civilian casualties during these joint military operations.
Which fundamentally undermines state authority.
Exactly. When a state claims they neutralized an insurgent cell, but the local citizens know an airstrike hit a civilian compound, state trust evaporates instantly. In Nigeria, despite President Tinubu's claim of an 81% drop in violence, citizens are expressing deep outrage over the recent loss of 7 military commanders in combat.
That contradicts the narrative of a pacified region.
And they are fiercely criticizing government rehabilitation deals for former terrorists. One specific phrase extracted from the social media data really stuck with me. My heart is bleeding.
That phrase perfectly encapsulates the psychological toll of a prolonged insurgency. Legitimacy is not derived from publishing statistics about neutralized targets. It is derived from the perceived provision of basic security.
Right.
When a population feels betrayed by its own security forces and remains terrified of the shadow government operating just outside their village, state legitimacy simply collapses.
And to complicate this security crisis, we have a public health crisis hitting the exact same vulnerable populations. The intelligence highlights a massive diphtheria outbreak spreading across sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes. The scale of the outbreak is significant enough that the CDC has officially issued a travel alert.
Which is huge.
It is. And this is where your earlier analogy about the invasive species becomes terrifyingly literal. Diphtheria is a vaccine-preventable bacterial infection. It only surges when vaccination rates plummet and public sanitation infrastructure fails.
Because the state's immune system has been destroyed. When insurgent networks blow up roads, blockade rural villages, and force medical clinics to close, they aren't just creating a security vacuum.
Right.
They're creating a biological vacuum.
Right.
The pathogens exploit the exact same geographic vulnerabilities that the terrorists do.
That is precisely how the mechanics of state failure operate. The insurgency dismantles the public health infrastructure, allowing a 19th century disease to surge in the year 2026.
That's devastating.
Delivering vaccines requires cold chain logistics, refrigeration, electricity, and secure transport. This creates an impossible dilemma for the state. How do you deploy medical teams to vaccinate a population when the power grid is down and the roads are controlled by mobile Sharia courts and laced with IEDs?
You cannot.
Exactly, you cannot. And when the state cannot provide basic physical security or basic medicine, the disconnect between a president's optimistic statistics and a citizen saying, "My heart is bleeding," becomes an unbridgeable chasm.
So given this incredibly complex matrix military juntas isolating themselves, Nigeria attempting massive joint operations, shadow governments expanding, and public health systems failing under the weight of diphtheria, what do the intelligence forecasts say we should be watching for in the near future?
The intelligence data highlights 3 specific near-term indicators to monitor closely. First, we need to track the operational rollout of the AES Confederal radio broadcasting out of Ouagadougou through mid-2026.
Okay, why that specifically?
This will be the ultimate test of whether the military juntas can successfully enforce a closed information loop on their citizens and maintain domestic control amidst ongoing insurgent pressure.
That makes sense. What's the second indicator?
Second, the diplomatic calendar is crucial. There are major ECOWAS diplomatic summits scheduled for late 2026. We need to watch those closely to see if the broader regional bloc can mount any successful efforts to reconcile with the breakaway Sahelian states.
Right, because if ECOWAS fails, that regional fracture could become a permanent reality.
Correct. Which would severely hamper any coordinated cross-border counterterrorism operations.
And the third indicator?
We must closely monitor Nigeria's domestic politics. President Tinubu is performing a highly delicate balancing act. He is relying heavily on U.S. troop deployments and intelligence support to maintain his offensive momentum against ISWAP and Boko Haram.
But he has to manage the domestic reaction to that.
Exactly. He must manage the inevitable parliamentary and public pushback regarding national sovereignty. If domestic pressure forces him to scale back that Western cooperation, Nigeria's military capacity could face a sudden critical bottleneck.
So what does this all mean? We are looking at a vast region where military force seems to be the primary tool every government is reaching for, regardless of who their international partners actually are.
This raises an important question, one that challenges the core assumptions of every state involved in this theater. Can pure kinetic military force, whether it is U.S. troops supporting Nigeria or Russian partners supporting Niger, ever actually solve what is fundamentally a crisis of local governance, historical disenfranchisement, and profound poverty?
That's the million-dollar question.
The intelligence shows that these terror networks do not just fight, they govern. Airstrikes can dismantle a militant camp, but an airstrike cannot build a functional court system, mediate a land dispute, or administer a diphtheria vaccine.
Yo, it can't.
The strategic momentum of the terror network suggests that military action alone is ultimately insufficient to stabilize the region.
It is a profound realization. To actually win, the state has to outgovern the insurgency, not just outgun it.
Exactly. And I will leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, building directly on U.S. AFRICOM's assessment about a recognized quasi-state forming.
Okay.
If these insurgent networks successfully link up across the tri-border area, consolidate their shattered governance, and effectively replace the state apparatus, how will the global economy and international law adapt to that?
Oh.
We are talking about an unrecognized extremist entity controlling vast, resource-rich territories that hold critical minerals like gold and uranium. Do global supply chains bypass them entirely, or do illicit international markets simply absorb them as the new de facto governing authority?
That is chilling to think about. The map wouldn't just be shifting, it would be rewritten entirely, challenging the very definition of a sovereign nation.
Exactly.
Well, if you want to track these shifting borders and watch these intelligence forecasts play out in real time, you should be using the exact same tools we utilize for today's deep dive. Visit www.stylonews.com to download the mobile or computer app.
It is a game changer for pattern of life analysis.
It really is. You can customize your own personal intelligence-style briefs by pulling from hundreds of traditional news sources, integrated seamlessly with real-time sentiment analysis from platforms like X. The platform features a location AI bot for instant geographic analysis, multilingual intelligence that translates over 20 languages instantly without any manual triage, and custom event search reporting.
Which is incredibly powerful.
So you can start a 7-day free trial right now, or just subscribe to the Executive Monthly Plan for $19.99 a month to get AI-powered news on demand. Thank you so much for joining us as the third person in the room today. We truly appreciate you taking the time to explore these complex, real-world issues with us.
Yes, thank you.
Please feel free to request topics for future deep dives, and be sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms. Have a great day and stay informed.